I have been sitting here surrounded by books and stats with my little pen and paper for so long, I feel like I just solved a murder. I feel like I'm playing Cluedo, ticking off each row, I don't know, but now I have all the stats to tell you about. Happy Friday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is my year review, the best books that I read in 2020 and just some facts about the year along the way. You know that video I posted last week where I was drinking leftover Prosecco from New Year? This is that same day. That was like 2 minutes ago. I just took off my jumper because it's really hot in here and I'm still sitting here, still drinking leftover Prosecco. In the year 2020, may it rest in peace, I read 157 books, which is the most books I've ever read in a year, partly because we were trapped inside all year with nothing else to do, and partly because I did 4 or 5 24-hour readathons, and a lot of the books I read were contained in those weekends. That's just over 47,000 pages that I read this year. One thing I did this year is switch from Goodreads to the story graph, and when I was looking at my stats just now, they give you some fun little graphs I'm going to show you. Like this one, which divides my reading up into moods. As you can see, a big range of moods, but a big chunk was lighthearted, and a big chunk was emotional, and a bigger chunk was dark and mysterious. The pacing of the books that I read was pretty evenly split, but as you can see I didn't read so many slow-paced books. And I also didn't venture over 500 pages very often, because who's got time for that? The fiction-non-fiction chart will surprise exactly no one, because I basically never read non-fiction. I think I read 6 this year, so this one was expected. And ratings-wise, 4-star was my most common rating to give out, which again is not surprising because I give 4 stars to anything ranging from I liked it to I really liked it, but it's not one of my all-time favourites. I just can't be bothered to be that precise with my ratings. I basically just stick to 2 stars, didn't like it, 3 stars, it was fine, 4 stars, liked it, or loved it, and I reserve 5 stars just as like a little reminder for books I particularly want to remember as a favourite. I know most people are always campaigning to get like 0.5, 0.25 rating options on Goodreads. I moved over to Storygraph where they do have those options, but I don't use them at all. I would rather it went down to just 3 options. Like, middle, or don't like. Anyway, the point is, I give a lot of 4 stars, I'm not that precise in my ratings, but I talk about the books instead. And then I've got some stats I collected on my own. In 2020, I had really wanted to commit to reading more diversely, so I wanted to see how I did there. Of the 157 books I read this year, 116 of them were by female or non-binary authors, which is 73%, which funny enough is actually a lot lower than usual. Usually I read like 90% female authors. So I guess you could say I'm diversifying my reading by letting men in. But I also think it's the fact that I read the entire Lemony Snicket series and the entire Percy Jackson series that a lot of the men were in there. But more importantly, was trying to read more authors of colour, and I read 23 books by authors of colour this year, which is just 14%, which is incredibly low. I was actually really shocked. I thought that I was a much more diverse reader than that, and I was really taken aback to see how low that number is. So that's something that I need to definitely much more actively change and set myself like proper plans and check-ins throughout the year. I want by the end of 2021 that percentage to be at the bare minimum 25%. That's like the absolute lowest it can be. It should be higher. Because what's really interesting is, okay, of all the books I read this year, only 14% of them were by authors of colour. But when I narrowed it down to only the books that I gave 5 stars to, which was just 16 books this year, then 9 of them were by authors of colour, which is 56%. So really, I should be reading 56% authors of colour overall to have the biggest chance of finding those stories that I love the most. So as I said, we're going for 25%, that's a bare minimum, but it really should be higher. I also just out of interest looked at how many books I read in translation, and the answer is I only read 9, which is less than 1%. But again, when I looked at just my 5-star books, then 18% of them were books in translation, which is only 3 books, but still out of 16, that's a much higher percentage. So again, really I should be aiming for 18% of the books I read to be books in translation. So what I'm going to do in 2021 is make that a really firm goal, and I'm going to make sure that I achieve that goal, particularly the one of reading books by authors of colour every single month. So that was a whistle-stop tour of my year as a whole, but now I'm going to tell you my favourite books of the year, and I have picked 12 here, and Again, this is why I don't like ratings. The 12 I have picked do not correlate with my 5-star reads. I had 16 5-star reads, I've got 12 favourite books here, some of them I gave 4 stars at the time. I probably should go back and change those ratings, but I can't be bothered. Like I said, ratings don't interest me. So I've got 12 favourite books I'm going to show you, but first I just wanted to give like a quick kind of honorary mention. There were 2 books this year which I did absolutely love. Based on the books themselves, they were top favourites, but since reading them I have discovered more things about the authors that have made me feel uncomfortable with promoting them. One of those books was Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So yes, if I'm being honest, I adored this book. It was one of my favourite books that I read this year. When I talked about it at my halfway point back in like June, I did a 5-star reads so far video. I talked about Americana in there, so if you do want to hear more of my thoughts, I will link to it and you can go and have a watch. At that time, I knew that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie had said some transphobic things in 2016, and I did address that in the video. I addressed that in one video, it might not have been that one, but I mistakenly thought that it had been kind of taken out of context or that she had apologised for it, so I didn't think it was a reason for me to avoid her as an author. But she has since this year really doubled down on the transphobic things that she has been saying and has shown a lot of support for J.K. Rowling's essay, which I found to be very hateful. So I don't really feel comfortable promoting Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie at the moment. If you do want my review, I will link it below. I'm not going to take it down or anything because it is my honest opinion of that book. And then similarly, another book that I absolutely loved this year was The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. But again, John Boyne has also been showing support for J.K. Rowling and has been criticised for a while, apparently, it turns out, about the way he talks about trans people. So those are 2 really, really disappointing things to have happened, because those are books that I really, really loved and really moved me this year. But after this, I don't want to keep promoting them. So I'm just mentioning them here in case you watch my 5-star reads video from June and then it's like, well, what happened to those 2 books that you apparently loved? So I'm telling you, yeah, I did love them. But there are other authors I want to turn my attention to now. I look so blue right now. I wanted to film earlier when the light was better. RG was using this room. It's fine. We're not mad, but we're a little mad because now I look blue. I have sorted these books in ascending order. It's a little arbitrary because it's quite hard to choose between 12 books that you love, but definitely the ones I'm going to say at the end are my absolute favourites. And I think this is a pretty good ranking of the top 12. So, coming in at number 12, we have The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This is a very short little book. It's a dystopian story about a man taking the British citizenship test, and it is like an episode of Black Mirror. It did not go where I thought it was going to go. It is dark and gripping and fascinating, and I read it super, super quickly and now want to reread it. At number 11, I've got Pages for You by Sylvia Brownrigg. This is a love story between 2 women who meet at university. One of them is a student, one of them is a graduate professor, and it's about the rise and fall of their love story. And it really hit me very deeply. This is one that crept up on me because I wasn't actually enjoying it that much at the beginning, but I soon completely fell in love with these characters and felt their story so, so deeply. We mostly hear from the perspective of the younger girl, Flannery, who is just so hopelessly in love with the older woman, Anne, and so you just go along this complete heartbreak with her, and it's just one that I couldn't stop thinking about. This was one of the ones that I didn't give 5 stars, but then realised I was in love with it. At number 10, Love is for Losers by Vipki Brugermann. This is a YA story that is like the modern version of Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging, but funnier. And I love Angus Thongs, but this is funnier. And this is more modern, and it's more feminist, and it's more body positive, and it's queer, and it's got these amazing friendships. It is just heaven. And I'm not a big YA reader, but this one was just so much fun. Number 9, The Clapback. One of the few non-fiction books I read actually made it into my top 10. So this is The Clapback by Elijah Lawal, your guide to calling out racist stereotypes. And I found it so interesting. So in this book, he goes through, he's got this like great voice, it's really, really accessible. He goes through specific stereotypes that you will hear about black people specifically, but he does talk about other stereotypes in there as well, about other races. And he explains really, really clearly where those stereotypes came from and why they're harmful. Even the ones that kind of seem to be positive, like black people are good dancers or black men have huge dicks, like that seems like a compliment, but it's actually a very harmful stereotype that comes from a really racist place. So it was very interesting. I did get quite tearful while reading this one. It is, as I said, written in a quite fun, kind of light-hearted, accessible way, but the topics that he's talking about are not fun or light-hearted at all. And I got so angry while reading particular chapters of this, particularly the chapters about police brutality, that I did get very cross and tearful and upset. But I do think it's a brilliant book. At number 9, I've got Dear Reader by Cathy Rentzenbrink. This is one that I have a reading vlog of me reading, so I will link that below. I just fell head over heels in love with it. This is another non-fiction. Look at me with 2 non-fictions in my best books of the year. I'd never read a Cathy Rentzenbrink book before, but this is her memoir of growing up reading and what books have meant to her at different points in her life and what books can mean to other people. So she has had this amazing career, and one of the things she does is works within prisons, running a literacy program. And again, I got really tearful when she started talking about this literacy program, what it can mean to the people in prison who haven't had the chance and opportunity to fall in love with reading the way that I have. It was just wonderful, and it was very unpretentious, and it was very real and like down to earth, as well as being amazingly romantic, because reading and the joy of reading is this amazingly romantic thing. I just loved it so much, and look how shimmery it is. Number 8, Severance by Ling Ma. This is about a pandemic, and I read it in January when it didn't feel too on the nose at all, but it might feel too on the nose if you were to read it now. It's literally about a pandemic that originates in China, and our main character is a girl roughly my age who works in publishing. She works in production, so her kind of first realising this is a big deal is when the factories in China that she works with all close down because so many people are falling ill with this virus. The virus then spreads all over the world. It's very creepy, but here's where it differs from our reality. The virus turns people into zombies. But I'm not a zombie book kind of reader at all, so just trust me when I say this is really good. This is like a literary fiction zombie novel. The zombies, I don't think I ever actually referred to as zombies in the book, but they do follow a lot of zombie tropes, and they are a representation of the kind of mindless monotony of modern life and hyper-capitalism, which is often what zombies are used to represent, but they're still done in this totally unique way, and I loved it. Number 6, The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This was a really beautiful book about a man who only has an 80-minute memory, but it's told from the perspective of his housekeeper. So she comes to his house every day with her young son, and they form this really special bond. Even though he can't remember her. Every day when she arrives, it's like it's the first time they've met. He has no memory of her. Even if she goes to the shop for more than 80 minutes and comes back, he won't remember. And slowly throughout the book, his memory gets shorter and shorter as well. But he still has this incredible bond with the housekeeper and with her son. And I just found it really moving. And also, he's a maths professor, so it's also about maths, and I love maths.
Ew, why?
Because it's the same in every country.
It's beautiful.
So all the love in the world for this book. At number 5, I've got My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is a pretty disturbing book. It is about a woman who, when she was at school as a young teenager, had a relationship with a teacher, which she, as an adult, and at the time, viewed as a consensual relationship, but we are able to see that it was not consensual. It was a complete abuse of power. He's an older man, she's a literal child. It is incredibly upsetting and disturbing, but I found it to be a really nuanced and sensitive exploration of this, because our main character needs to believe that it was a consensual love story, because that has formed so much of her life as she grew up. She's been so affected by this that actually having people come to her and want to help her through what she went through and call out this man for what he did doesn't help her in that moment, because she can't view herself as a survivor of abuse, because that would force her to totally redefine her life. It's really complicated and upsetting, but I feel it was really wonderfully done. In 4th place, Anxious People by Frederick Backman. You know me, I love Frederick Backman, and this one was hilarious and very sweet. This is about a bank robber whose bank robbery goes wrong and who accidentally ends up holding a whole apartment building full of people hostage. So it's a very silly story. All of the characters are completely absurd. It is not a realistic story at all. It's very reminiscent of the 100-year-old man who climbed out the window and disappeared, partly because it's also translated from Swedish and partly because it's also completely ridiculous. But it is Fredrik Backman, so of course it's also very touching and moving and sweet. And I kind of predicted most of what happened before it happened. There's a lot of like heavy hint dropping, but that didn't ruin the enjoyment of it at all for me. In third place, I have Kindred by Octavia Butler, which is a book I read quite recently. And this was interesting because I really hated the last Octavia Butler book I read, which was called Parable of the Sower. That was sci-fi and it was really not my thing at all. So I kind of thought I'd give Kindred a go. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. It's a time travel story, so I guess I should have predicted. I always love time travel stories. This is about a girl who is around 27, I think. Something like that. She's living in the 70s, but she keeps getting thrown back in time to the 1800s, where she meets this white boy who, every time she goes back in time, his life is in danger and she has to save him. And she realises that he is going to grow up to be part of her bloodline. She didn't realise that she had white ancestors, and he's also going to grow up to become a slave owner. There are some very harrowing scenes in here. As we know, slavery was completely horrible, and so there are some terrible scenes in here. But I thought our main character, I loved her so much, and I thought this story was just kind of extraordinary, the way it connected these two humans who are separated by time and culture and race and so much understanding, and you grow to really, really hate the young boy as he grows up into this slave owner who just struggles to understand any black person other than our main character, who he feels really connected to, as being human. Even the ones he falls in love with, one of the slaves, but just doesn't seem to understand how to really see them as human. So it's very upsetting and very awful, but I thought it was a wonderfully written book, and I loved the time travel aspect of it. I thought it was really clever. In second place, I've got Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, which I think was possibly the first book I read this whole year, so it's impressive that it stayed in my top 12, in my top 2 in fact. I've talked about this one quite a bit already, but this is 12 kind of interconnected stories about 12 different characters who are mostly women and who are mostly black, and kind of paint this portrait of what it has been to be a British woman, specifically a black British woman, over the last few generations. So we have some that are set in the present day, we go back in time, and slowly all of the links between these characters become clearer and clearer. So it's almost like 12 different short stories, but the overall feel is very much of a novel where the characters keep reappearing, and even ones that don't reappear, there are kind of themes that come along, and I just loved it. It's written quite experimentally, we don't really get much punctuation, so I wasn't sure how accessible I would find it, but I actually found it incredibly easy to read, and everyone I've spoken to who has read it has said the same thing, that they didn't find it inaccessible or kind of too highbrow at all. It's just beautifully written, and it's a book that I found very relatable in lots of ways. Obviously I don't have the experience of blackness, but I do have the experience of womanhood, and so I felt very connected to all of the characters, but also while learning more about what their specific experience would be like that I can't relate to. So yeah, I loved it. And finally, book number 1, my absolute favourite book of the year. I just realised before filming this, I don't have it with me because I lent it to my friend because it was such a good book, and that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. You're probably not surprised to hear me say that because I've talked about it so much. Such a Fun Age is about 2 main characters, kind of 3 main characters. We have Amira, who is a young black girl. She's like 24-ish. She works as a babysitter for Alex, who is a white woman, who is an influencer. She's kind of very much a white feminist. She's very empowering to lots of women, and it's her daughter that Amira looks after. And again, it's this really fun, really accessible read that I would recommend to anyone, no matter how much or little they usually read, but the issues that it's tackling get very deep. And I think there's so much in there for so many different readers. Whoever you are, you will find a different message to take from this book, or a different particular thing that stood out to you. It's written by a black author, and the main character is a black woman, But I think for me as a white reader, I connected to the character of Alex, but in a very negative way. She's not portrayed as a villain. She's not portrayed as a terrible person, but she is portrayed as a white feminist who wants to be seen as a good ally and whose attempts at friendship and allyship towards Amira are so performative and so not genuine. And I found that, for me, was the main thing I got from reading this book, was seeing some of my own behaviours kind of reflected back at me in this incredibly unflattering but educational light. So I found that amazing. But it's also just this really fun read. So Amira has this relationship with our kind of third main character, who is a white man, who also is very guilty of his own type of performative allyship. We get their present day story, we also get flashbacks, so we get to really learn these characters inside out. And that's why I think this book stood out so much, is that every single character in this book felt 100% real. This was some of the best character writing I have ever come across in my life. I could see and hear and like feel and smell every character in that book. Smelling them is a bit gross, maybe I couldn't smell them, but they all felt 100% real, and so none of them felt evil. Even the ones that I was so cross with and so fed up with, they weren't just like the villain for a plot device. They were a real person with real, often good intentions, wanted to be a good person, but were just going about it the wrong way, and were doing it in a way that put themselves at the centre, which I think is something that a lot of us can be guilty of, and I definitely notice that I have been guilty of it in the past. I'm probably still guilty of it by talking at the beginning of this video about how much I wanted to diversify my reading, but not having like done that much about it. So it's just a book that I think I want to reread it. There's so much to think about. There are so many lessons to keep learning from it. But it's also just really fun and has a lot of like funny moments as well. So I honestly would recommend this book to every single person in the world, I think. So do let me know what your favourite books of 2020 were. I would love to know, in particular, any that you would recommend to me. Please do drop me a comment below and I would check them out. And I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Why does it hurt so bad? So bad.